ZJ mentioned, I'm John Humphreys. I'm 16 years old. I'm a Masternaut candidate in SCUBAnauts International, which means I do a lot of scientific diving. And this presentation is about when I went to Antarctica. So let's talk about my journey to Antarctica. How the heck did I get there? Well, I was lucky enough to go on a citizen scientist expedition to Antarctica with Blue Green Expeditions. But in order to do that, I had to have a lot of experience. And I was notified about this trip in November, and the trip was in February. So I had a couple months to train for Antarctica. The minimum experience that you need to have is 50 dry suit dives, 10 of which need to be in cold water. Hint, I live in Florida, where there is no cold water. A plethora of dry suit skills and excellent buoyancy control. In the short span of months, thank you to some wonderful instructors and friends of mine, I was able to get a lot more than the minimum to really help me prepare. I got 51 dry suit dives, 12 of which were in cold water below 4 degrees Celsius, which is 39 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of practice with the dry suit, mainly just my instructor flipping me upside down as much as he could. 3 certifications from 2 agencies, dry suit diver, advanced nitrox, and intro to tech, and then also I got my cavern diving and intro to caves up in the cave country of Florida. A couple places that I dove to prepare. I dove at Hudson Grotto, I dove at Blue Grotto, Devil's Den, a couple spots in Florida, and then also I took a trip up to Buffalo, New York during the Arctic blast and dove in a quarry up there because everything else was frozen solid with about this much ice. And yep, that's me standing next to some icebergs in New York. So I want to tell you guys a bit about Antarctica. Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth, the windiest place on Earth, the driest place on Earth, and the deadliest place on Earth. So that's why I had to get a lot of experience beforehand. To get down to Antarctica, I had to fly from my home in Florida all the way down to the bottom of the world, Ushuaia, Argentina. If any of you guys know where that is, it's kind of on the very tip of Argentina. And so right underneath Argentina is the tip of Antarctica, the Antarctic Peninsula, and that's where we were going. We had to cross across this stretch called the Drake Passage. Who here knows about the Drake Passage? Who has heard of it before? Awesome. So we got a couple. So the Drake Passage, for those of you who don't know, can be one of the craziest places on the ocean ever. Crazy wind and waves and storm. But if you're really lucky, then you get it when it's calm. And that's what I got when I passed through. And it was so calm, in fact, that we even sent out a team of divers to dive. And it looked just like the water out here. And when they got back, I asked them how their dive was to describe it to me, tell me what they saw. And all they said was blue. So, first landing, landed on the coast of the peninsula over here in Antarctica. Got to see this beautiful mountainscape during sunrise. And then got to see my first penguin. This is a chin strap penguin. They're very cute. That is not blood. That is poop. Penguins eat a lot of krill, and krill is pink, which turns their poop pink. That right there is lenticular clouds. They form a lot over the mountains and the cold air like that, so they're very common in Antarctica. We have a fur seal right there at the bottom, and over there, that bird right there is a skua. And skuas like to eat penguins. I got to go on an absolutely incredible dive. I dove on an iceberg in an iceberg graveyard. And what an iceberg graveyard is it's basically where it's shallow enough to where all the icebergs aren't floating anymore. They're kind of grounded, they're not moving, and that's the safest to dive around them. You don't want to dive around icebergs that are floating, because as they go up and down and the ice caves are opening, will suck water in and you can get trapped in the iceberg. So this is me on top of the iceberg, under the iceberg. You can see right here, the top here is about 6 feet, and the depth that we were diving to was 60 feet. So it goes down quite a bit. So if you see bigger icebergs, they are crazy deep. I got to see a little sun star. We call them the Death Star. On the ship and then under the iceberg. So, polar plunge. What is that? Well, it's where they take all the really dumb people, they gather them up, and they take them out to an island. They make them strip down into their swimsuits, and then willingly run into the cold water. I was one of those dumb people. And I was really, really confident beforehand. I wanted to be the first one in the water. Therefore, I was the first one out of my clothes. And therefore, I was the longest one to wait in the cold to get to go in the water. And I waited there like that for about 10 minutes before I got to go in. And I really started second guessing myself. I said, you know what, screw it, let's go for it. And I should not have gone. I definitely regretted it. My socks fell off as I was running out, and they started drifting out, so I had to swim after them. It was horrible, but I'm glad I did it. We got the really, really unique opportunity to visit Palmer Station. So, as some of you may know, there are a lot of scientific research stations in Antarctica, right? And the U.S., the United States of America, we mainly operate 3. You guys might have heard of McMurdo Station. Do a lot of you know McMurdo?
Yeah.
Antarctica, perfect. There's also the South Pole Station at the geographic South Pole. And then there's another station called Palmer Science Station. The Palmer Science Station is the only station, U.S. station in Antarctica above the Antarctic Circle. So it's right on the peninsula, and we were like one of the only ships this season to get to go do that. And that's me with their water tank. And right there, that bird is a really, really, really interesting bird. So excuse my language, that right there is a shit chicken. And you might be wondering, John, why is it called a shit chicken? Well, the name pretty much gives it away. It is the only non-seabird in Antarctica, which means it doesn't have webbed feet, it just has feathers and feet, and it can't swim, which means it can't get fish. So how does it eat and survive in Antarctica? It eats the feces of other animals. Penguins, seals, humans, it doesn't care. It eats it all. And another thing that's really interesting about the shit chicken is that it will help the penguins with their tapeworm problems. And again, you might be wondering, how does it help with their tapeworm problems? Well, I have a great picture to show you all how. Right there. That is the Antarctic ecosystem at its best, at its finest. All right. Well, I'd like to kind of change gears now and tell you all a bit about the science work I was doing down in Antarctica. So one of the science jobs that I was doing while I was down there was I was doing these things called roaming video benthic transect survey dives. Long description. All it basically means is I took a camera and I took a measuring tape. I went down to the bottom of the seafloor. I rolled out the measuring tape and I would record on both sides so that the big scientists up top, they could review my footage and they could see how often certain things are appearing. They could study how healthy that location is based on what's coming. And one time I had to be down there diving for 45 minutes to gather the data. And I was actually feeling really good because that was right after my polar plunge. So nothing felt as cold as that did. Another science project that I did was my research project. So this was a project that I conducted, and it was on icebergs as climate change indicators. And so what that was is we kind of took a look at icebergs, and let me explain what that means. So within the Antarctic peninsulas, temperatures have been warming at around 6 times the global average, which is a lot. This is due to something called the Antarctic Oscillation. What is that, John? What is the Antarctic Oscillation? Well, I have a great image here. And these arrows represent the westerly winds that encircle Antarctica. And what the Antarctic Oscillation does is it basically strengthens these winds and then weakens these winds. And what that'll do is that'll cause a lot of cooling and cool air to come over East Antarctica over here. And it'll make a lot of the warmer air come over here to the peninsula. And so my project aimed to look here at the peninsula and analyze the size, shape, and types as well as texture of Antarctic icebergs to see if it can answer a couple questions for us. Number one, can icebergs serve as an early warning sign of regional change in temperature? Are icebergs a cost-effective tool to identify early signs of warming? My hypothesis was that warmer and colder regions of the Antarctic Peninsula will have differing iceberg types. Therefore, changes in warming can be identified by an increase or a decrease in one of those types of icebergs. The methodology that we used to conduct this, we did 2 iceberg surveys per day for a total of 3 days, from 28 February, 29 February, and 01 March. All surveys were conducted in broad daylight. We did no night surveys, and the study sites were Palmer Science Station, Paradise Bay, Useful Island, Point Harbor, and Palaver Point. And to put those on a map, this is zoomed into the peninsula with north up here. You have Point Harbor and Palaver Point over there, Palmer Station, which is the science station we visited, and then you've got Paradise Bay and Useful Island right there. A couple different types of icebergs. So this is what we were looking for. We were looking to see how many of these different types there were. Tabular, this is going to be one of the more common icebergs that you see. It's just going to be a flat slab on top of the surface. A wedge is basically exactly how it sounds. It's just going to be angled towards the water. A dry dock is when you're going to have, it looks like 2 icebergs, but they're actually connected underwater. So it's kind of like 2 pinnacles connected. And speaking of pinnacles, you have a pinnacle right there, which is where you have 1 or more pinnacle spires forming from the iceberg. You have dome, again, just like what it sounds. And then blocky. Blocky is kind of a miscellaneous type of iceberg. You see those types of icebergs a lot where they might be flat on the top, but they're not like a rectangular slab like tabular. They're going to be more vertical, more higher up, or they might be a bit like rougher. So we had volunteer iceberg surveyors. This was my volunteer iceberg survey team that I had right here, that I had the privilege of leading. There were 16 of them, and they took observations using a survey sheet, and then over 250 icebergs on the west side of the Antarctic Peninsula were surveyed. And so there's an example of one iceberg. This iceberg right here was about as big as our ship, about as big as this ship, and then you can see the massive thing that looks like a glacier behind it. Nope, that's another iceberg, just bigger than that one. This was the survey sheet that was used to collect the data. The surveyors would go out onto the deck of the ship, they would take the survey sheet, and they would mark down the icebergs that they saw. They described things like size, class ID, color, texture, stranded, and any notes or remarks they had. They had a guide on how to note those. Methods. At the end of each survey day, the group then gathered together, and what we do is we talk about the icebergs we'd seen. We would look at pictures that had been taken, things like that, and then finally we would enter it into a spreadsheet. That was what I did, a lot of entering. And then data was then converted into these pivot tables, so make looking at easier, because it's kind of hard to look at 261 data points, but if you kind of compile them, a lot easier to look at. And we assess class versus location and texture versus location. This is the pivot table of class ID across location, so you can see it kind of spread out here. And then you also have texture, and then by location. And I'll get into texture in a little bit here. Challenges in survey bias. As you can imagine, there were a bit of challenges doing this, and a lot of bias. Accounting for individual experience and bias was very difficult, but it was taken into consideration. All surveyors were trained at relatively the same time, and all of them had no prior experience doing this. And to account for bias, volunteers were asked to take photos so that we could all look at it as a group and agree on which type it was, so that we just didn't have one person's opinion affecting that data point. That would also rat out possibly any duplicates that we may have found if we could compare pictures. This was my group and I discussing one night all of the icebergs that we had seen. Here's a table demonstrating the location versus class ID. So this is by percentage of abundance. And if you look at these here, this is in kind of order of northernmost to southernmost, right? And so at Point Harbor and kind of across all of these, you can see that blocky and wedge are very common, right? So that doesn't really help us. But then we also noticed that over here at Palaver Point, we had a huge spike in Pinnacle, and not really as much as these other ones. And then also we have a pretty large amount of dry dock at these three as opposed to these two over here. So We also have location versus texture. So there were 3 types of textures that we surveyed for, which was broken, smooth, and wavy. So what broken is basically if you imagine you go to your fridge and you put in the ice dispenser that you want crushed ice. And then you get a bunch of crushed ice in your hand and you kind of just like morph it together, right? That's kind of the broken texture. The smooth texture, exactly how it sounds, it's going to be a very smooth wall. It's going to look like a, like ice cube. And then wavy is going to have these scalloped sides going in and out. And it's going to have a lot of them, and it's going to look like a very wavy texture. And so again, you can look here at Point Harbor and Caliber Point. There's really not a lot of broken. Across all of them, there's a pretty large amount of smooth, but over here at Point Harbor and Caliber Point, you can see there's a higher percentage of wavy textured icebergs. And so let's break this data down and what it means. And first to do that, let's break the locations into these regions so that we can make looking at this data a bit easier. So let's put Point Harbor and Caliber Point as the northernmost region, Palmer Station as the middle ground, and Paradise Bay and Useful Island as the southernmost. Here they are on the map again. And we are also assuming that the further we go south, the colder the temperatures are going to be. This is because a study was conducted by Cambridge University that showed that for every degree of latitude that you go down, it gets colder on average by about 0.89 degrees Celsius. So we know that as we go down, it's definitely getting colder. So pinnacle and dry dock class icebergs appear to occur more often in the northernmost regions, in these warmer regions, right? And warmer temperatures lead to icebergs forming one or more pinnacle spires. How does that work? How does that happen? Well, let's take a look at a study conducted by the New York University. They put these cylindrical ice cubes into these water baths, and they put them in at different temperatures. And so this one here, this was the warmest temperature at 8 degrees Celsius. And what's happening is, you all know how hot air rises and cold air, kind of rests down and goes down. Why does that happen? Does anyone know the answer? Same reason a balloon goes up? Density, right? Exactly. So it's all due to density, and the same thing happens with water. Hot water is less dense than cold water. And so what's going on here is, as the ice begins to melt, the meltwater immediately surrounding this ice is colder than the warmer water surrounding that meltwater. Therefore, it's also denser than the surrounding water. So then what happens is this colder water begins to sink and flow down, and it starts letting this warmer water in at the top. And so you see an unequal melting, with melting happening faster at the top than it is happening at the bottom, forming this pinnacle shape. The exact opposite happens. This was at 4 degrees Celsius bath. You see the hot water kind of going down because the immediate meltwater is warmer than the colder water surrounding it. So sorry, my colors are a little bit messed up, but this is warmer water because it's melting right off the ice, it's going up, and the colder water is coming in at the bottom. So in addition to class IDs, the texture also appears to be linked to geographic location. Broken textures, we've seen that they're more common in the southernmost regions, and smooth textures are more often in the northernmost region. Smooth was the most abundant texture, making up 37.16% of the total. But the wavy texture were the most spotted texture after smooth. This may be because the meltwater is likely denser than surrounding water in some places and less dense in others, leading to more complex flows. So in other words, in these northernmost and middle ground regions, the wavy textures are appearing a whole awful lot more than the other textures. And this is because, now let's take a look at the third bath that the New York University put ice into. And this is right in the middle of these two. This is right in between 4 degrees Celsius and 8 degrees Celsius. It's kind of this middle temperature. And what's happening here is you're having the cold water and the warm water starting to mix, and it's starting to form these vertical row of vortices. And these vortices are causing the ice to be carved in this scalloped fashion, forming this wavy texture. So this explains why we see the wavy texture more often in those middle ground and northern locations. Future work to be done with this project. So as we've discussed, fire-type icebergs seem to appear in warmer temperatures. To further support this conclusion, future experiments should be conducted in the Arctic, as the Arctic is a more comparatively tropic region of Antarctica. This is because Antarctica is actually a continent. It's surrounded by water, and this water, it kind of stops a lot of heat from going in, those westerlies, and it also stops a lot of cold from going out, right? And so, but up in the Arctic, it's the exact opposite. What is the Arctic? It's just ice and water. There's no land, right? So it's water surrounded by a bunch of continents, and that's causing more cold air to come out of it. When things like glaciers melt, it kind of opens. That's where the Arctic blasts come from, and things like that. So yeah, more research should be conducted in the Arctic to see if a more abundant amount of pinnacle and dry dock icebergs appear. And then also more research should be conducted in areas closer to the South Pole to see if fewer pinnacle and dry docks appear. Maybe a place like McMurdo Sound or East Antarctica, where we've already covered how those are a lot colder than the Antarctic Peninsula. And if this is shown, then it will strengthen support of the conclusions, whereas if the adverse results are shown, then it will help further the understanding of the impact of temperature on these icebergs further than this limited study could show. I'd like to give a couple acknowledgments. My Masternaut committee, they helped me go through the research question process and get my project together. That was Katie Cooper, Sarah Vincent, Victoria Scriven, and Dr. Jacob Malachi. Volunteer iceberg survey team, like I said, I had those 16 people who volunteered on their expedition to help me out, and I am eternally grateful for that. Ms. Faith Ortiz, the co-owner and expedition leader for Blue Green Expeditions, she's the one who let me go on that expedition as a minor and allowed me to come along. The MV Ortelius captain and crew, that's the ship we were on. I cannot thank them enough. It was absolutely a great sail. Sponsors and donors, I had a lot of people donate to help me get to Antarctica. As you can imagine, it's pretty expensive. Horizontal divers, Brian Kelly, who was my main instructor, now helped me get certified, and then my cold water instructors up in Buffalo, New York, professional scuba with Matt Carroll and John Aaron. Any questions? Yes. Yes. So in Antarctica, we utilized air because it was just easier to maintain in that dangerous process because we were compressing everything on the ship. So we were just using air. Yeah, give or take about an hour. Yeah, we really didn't want to push it because something that can happen with diving is called a decompression injury, decompression illness. It's when inert gas, nitrogen bubbles kind of go into your bloodstream, and as you come up, if you come up too quickly without letting that off gas go into your lungs and breathe it out, then those bubbles will begin to expand, and then you've got literal nitrogen bubbles in your bloodstream trying to get out. And in cold environments, you're much more susceptible to that. You got a question, man? What was that? Did I see any fish? I think I saw a couple fish, mainly just little ice fish. They're really, really good at hiding. So I didn't see a whole lot of them, no. Any other questions? What was that? Which one? The bird?
Yeah, I think she's asking about the bird eat people.
Oh,
Eat people.
it does not eat people. It eats their feces. It eats what they ate before.
What was your favorite part?
My favorite part, probably that iceberg dive. It was kind of crazy getting out there. It takes a really long time. I have a time-lapse video that I could probably show you guys later if you guys want to come up and talk to me. But you're basically putting on a crazy amount of gear. I mean, I'm wearing like my entire closet underneath my dry suit. A dry suit is basically this thing that seals to your neck and to your wrists, or if you have gloves, then you have these thick gloves on. And you gotta get all prepped and ready. And then I got all the way out there on the boat, and my nose started bleeding pretty bad right before the dive, so I just stopped my nosebleed, and I was like, am I good? And they were like, yep, so I pulled back on for the dive. Luckily my mom wasn't there to tell me on the dive.
Did you, when you got back from Antarctica back to Argentina, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get sick at all from like the difference in temperature, you or anyone else you were with?
I will say acclimating to the temperature was pretty crazy. So originally, when I got to Ushuaia, Argentina, it has a temperature of about 60 degrees. And as a Floridian, that was pretty cold to me. And I was wearing, my expedition jacket, I was wearing pants, I was wearing like everything. I get down to Antarctica, I'm wearing everything. And then probably like a week or two into the expedition, we had a barbecue out on the back of the ship. And I think I went out in jeans and a t-shirt. And I was out there eating barbecue for probably 20 minutes before I decided to go back in and put a beanie on. And then going back to Ushuaia, I was definitely like, wow, this is not cold at all. And then coming back to Florida, I was like, this is way too hot. Where the heck is the AC? Let's get this stuff cranking right now. How many days did it take? So the expedition in total was about 3 weeks long. So getting down to Ushuaia. When I was down in Ushuaia, I actually climbed a mountain that was right behind my hotel. I just kept staring at it every time I woke up and went to bed, and I was like, I gotta climb that while I'm here. So I woke up at like 4 a.m., I think the day before the expedition. I climbed up the mountain. It started raining and pouring really bad and storming really bad. I pushed through until my group said they wanted to go back, so we went back down the mountain. And then I finally got breakfast later. That was horrible. I got there after the breakfast ended, and it was all like cantaloupe. And then to prepare right before, I also dove in the Beagle Channel in Ushuaia, Argentina. And then after I went to this guy's presentation, I don't know how many of you know of him, but who here knows or has heard of Rick Stanton? So Rick Stanton, for those of you who don't know, you probably do know him. Who knows about the Thailand cave rescue for all the soccer kids that were in the cave? So Rick Stanton was kind of the lead guy who led that rescue. And I actually got to meet up with him, and we went to the Hard Rocks for drinks, but all I could get was a cookies and cream milkshake, so. Yes?
He wants to know if whenever you got out of the polar plunge, if it physically hurt you, like your skin whenever you got out.
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, really, really, really horrible. I remember, like I said, I was so confident. There was an iceberg out there, and I was like, I'm going to swim out there, and I'm going to touch that iceberg, and I'm going to come back. And I start running, and all of a sudden my feet feel like they're on fire, and I'm like, you know what, just screw it. So I jump in. Now everything's on fire. I start swimming, and I think I'm about to touch the iceberg, and I look up, and I've only made it like 10 feet, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. And I turn around, and I start swimming out, and like I said, my socks were floating right past me, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So I go and I grab my socks, and I start going to walk back up this rocky surface, and all of a sudden my body starts shutting down, and I start getting cold paralyzed in the water. But luckily I got out before that.
So did you catch any mahi there or no?
Oh, a whole bunch. Yeah, tuna, mahi, oh yeah, everything.
Okay.
No, unfortunately, no fishing.
No fishing?
No fishing.
Are you serious? You went all the way over there and didn't fish?
Correct.
All right.
Just a quick one. Did you learn anything about climate change from this
Climate
experience?
change. Oh! Climate change? I want to hear this one.
Well, I could say that there were certainly some things that
That's like
would
50
show
years.
signs of climate change. Like I said, at Palmer Station, when they originally built the station, there was a glacier that was right up, butting against the station. And they have pictures and photographs of it, and now the glacier has receded 5 miles backwards away from it.
Do you think being an astronaut would be more enjoyable than scuba diving?
Funny you mentioned that. That's actually my life goal. I want to be an astronaut, so I think that the training would be really cool. I know that when you're diving as an astronaut in a suit, it's really horrible because you're upside down and it looks really cool, but you're just supported by this metal ring around your neck.
You have 10 minutes with the EPA. What are you going to tell them?
I'll probably just give them this presentation right here.
Last question.
Did you see any whales?
I did. I saw a whole bunch of whales. So it was really cool. There's a crazy amount of whales in Antarctica. I mean, a lot more than you can imagine. There's blue whales, orcas, killer whales, which actually, fun fact, killer whales is a mistranslation. It was actually whale killer. We mistranslated it as killer whale because they kill the whales. And then, what else was there? Humpback whales, sperm whales, a lot of dolphins and porpoises down there. Not, bottlenose like we have here, but some different looking ones, black and white ones. Yeah, there are also a lot of seals down there. A funny thing is, we go out on these rib boats to go out to the sites for diving and things like that. And while we were out there, a humpback whale actually came up and hit the boat with its tail. It was pretty funny.
All right, I think we'll end it on there, John. Folks, he is 16 years old. Give it up for John Humphrey.
And let's give a special thanks to CJ for making this presentation possible. Crew of the Margaritaville at Sea, the Islander, for giving us this absolutely spectacular cruise.
Thank you so much for coming along. That was absolutely awesome. Your parents must be very proud of you. We've got bingo coming up in a few moments' time, so if you want to go play bingo, that's happening next door. Don't forget 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock showtimes tonight, starring a cast in Caribbean Heat Remix. Have a great one, everybody. Fins up, and one more time, give it up for John Humphreys.